Hello, welcome to Censored News, the Dr. Deep State perspective. And I have a few stories today that I'd like to go over with you. So, this first story is from El Paso, Texas, which is on the southern border of Texas. When I tell people I live on the southern border of Texas, sometimes they say El Paso, and I say, well, that's 12 hours away, but we are both on the southern border. And here it says El Paso at its breaking point as 2,000 illegals enter the city each day. And this is a crisis in the world, and this does need to be talked about. Something's going on in the entire world that's breaking the logic of the democratic process. And the only explanation that I think makes sense is the replacement thesis. And I do want to, if I haven't done it before, leave a link in the description. I happen to live in a place where the population is about 90, there's about between 1 and 2 million people where I live. The census is not that good at keeping track. And sometimes people will ask me, do you see a lot of the immigration? And it is happening where I'm at, but you don't really notice it. The population's about 97% Mexican, so it's kind of difficult to see. And I'm not literally, at the standing on the Rio Grande looking for it. But this is a crisis that is going to hit all major American cities and all major European cities. It is aimed at the replacement of Europeans in particular, I believe. It's a larger metaphysical attack on Christian civilization, in my opinion. It breaks my heart to hear stories about Sweden. This is where I'm ethnically Scandinavian. Um, it breaks my heart to hear stories about Germany and Ireland. Just the burdening of the system, and that you just can't go backwards. Things will never be the same again. Um, I guess what really I guess what really hits me is, I'm European of origin. I live in America, and just thinking that the world will never be the same. That of the 7 or 8 billion people that live on the earth, that not many people have a special regard for European sovereignty in terms of our right to have our own country. Um, that said, there are thoughts I have on this, and I do want to leave a link to the replacement theory and another one, how Catholics should think about that, and how Catholics or Christians should think about a world in which we're being invaded. And I do think these are trying times. I think that it's important to, it's easy to get race activated these times. All these stories about BML movements are having their effect, and the replacement of whites in the job market, uh, imbalance in criminal treatment, media focusing on white hatred. Um, from a spiritual perspective, I think white people are being tried, and it's my opinion that there's a way to have Christian grace in response to this, and one of them is to put your faith before your race, and I know sometimes that's difficult. Um, but that's my opinion on the race thing. Um, it's just not going to get any better. There's no way you can unwind this. There's no way you can take these people up and ship them back, as maybe was kind of believable under the first Trump administration. Things are never going to be the same, and it's difficult to accept that. I use the expression the creation of a polyglot civilization, but it's really not that. It's a polyglot anti-civilization. And there was a model of this I read. I think the author was Amy Tan. Not sure, doesn't really matter. I think it's World on Fire. I think it's about 15 years old. Her thesis, and it was kind of a Jewish apologetics. I think she's Asian and her husband is Jewish, and I believe she was at the time professor at Yale. And this model, it was kind of pro financing to get an empire off the ground. And I think there's some truth to that. There's a place that high finance is responsible for the projection of certainly the empires over the last 800 years in Europe. But this larger model she proposed is if you're going to have an empire, at some point, diversity is good. Differing differing skill sets come into play to expand this thing. But at some point, it reaches its natural zenith, and a law of diminishing returns hits in, and there's a loss of purpose and a loss of identity. And white people are soon going to be in that place, I believe, in the world. The cities are going to be dominated by people that are non-white. Whites will be relegated to the countryside. And even then, that's only going to last so long. So it's really a destruction of Christian civilization as we have understood it, as represented by white people. Now, could it exist in another guise? Yes, it could, in theory. But this is about the destruction of civilization, period. There's going to be nothing left. It's supposed to be ashes so the phoenix can rise. And the people that are engineering this great replacement are playing for keeps. There is no unwinding this thing. And so when we go forth, I have to remind myself when I look through these headlines, it's hard not to get labored by these things and pained by these things. But I believe a Christian walk is about seeing the tension in the world and in our own psyches, and that is how God speaks to us in these times of trouble. So I think in a strange way, it's a message that we can see a perverse story of redemption within it, but it takes some openness to the grace to see this through the eyes of Christ. I have another story for us here. Let's switch gears. So if there is a solution for this, and it's very possible, there is no point of having a defeatist attitude about this. If there is a solution to this, it is to identify the replacement thesis and who's responsible for it. And we know it's particularly being censored against us right now. So what I am going to suggest is there's not only sort of a demonic stronghold that we can find ourselves in if we can't separate this attack on us as Anglos, if we can't separate that from and really see it as an attack on us spiritually and sort of transcend that attack spiritually. We must also do it with the idea of anti-Semitism. I've never said that out loud, the idea of anti-Semitism, but the definition of that is seeing somebody through the guise of race. And I don't think most Christians are. I think most Christians, for example, it's a religious issue when a Jewish person becomes Christian and they see the light as we see it through our spectrum. I think almost all Christians are okay with that. So anti-Semitism is something Jewish people can use quite freely, but almost always incorrectly when they're directing it at Christians. With that said, I have a story here. Neoconservative. Do we have a headline here? Neoconservative Ben Shapiro assembles Jewish community panel to hector Elon Musk to censor more on Twitter. And at some point, I think stories like this are more than just some kind of psyop or controlled back and forth. I think some of these stories need to be taken at face value. Neoconservative Ben Shapiro on Thursday put together a panel of rabbis and other leaders in the Jewish community to hector Elon Musk to censor anti-Semitism. So there are so many Catholics, Protestants, conservative Catholics, conservative Protestants that are comfortable with that guy. And I think that division that's going on, certainly within Catholicism, and I think within Christianity, that's Fizzerpoint. He will be a mouthpiece, his wire show. And those people that sort of align with that, the Jordan Petersons and this group. And my position on this, in terms of defending the mystical body of Christ, is it should be done without compromise. And I've made that point. There's one way to the Father, it's through the Son. And this path that we are going to go on when we start listening to Him define what a Christian is or what a Catholic is a dangerous, slippery slope into denial of Christ. And again, in my forthcoming book, the final chapter, when Christ becomes hate speech, we're moving into that time. And I know between Catholics and Protestants, there is a great division in many ways. For us Catholics, me as a convert, I came to see that being a part of the mystical body of Christ, the Catholic Church showed me what it meant to obey the commandments in full, the fullness of that faith, to participate in body and spirit. And the body means participating in the Eucharist. I have to have access to that body through apostolic succession. But I also understand that this is the fullness of the faith and God can work outside of the sacraments. What I'm getting to is where we're going with the replacement and the controlled narrative and the censorship is that I see this accelerating. And typologically speaking, I think things will be more like in the early days. And I would very much identify with a Protestant when push comes to shove. When you're going to deny Christ or have access to foods and services? Well, that becomes a question of being obedient to Christ. I think the breakdown between Catholic and Protestant, the division breaks down at that point when you're asked, are you going to deny Christ in order to not be executed? The difference between a Protestant and the Catholic when it comes to a situation of martyrdom becomes, in my mind, pretty minimal. This is dark stuff, but it's hard not to see this direction. And that's why the connection here between the borders and the censorship of the media, and we have to make those connections, and we have to see how this community here of the wire community is shaping up. And I will stand with the assertion of Dr. Dennis Fahey and say that whatever happens in the world, we must defend the mystical body of Christ completely. Okay, I got a final story for everyone. So before I begin, yes, I think in these times, these are snares. Anti-Semitism is I think, a demonic stronghold. Holding on to whiteness can be a demonic stronghold. These are natural impulses, but we, as Christians, need to put these things into perspective spiritually and understand the challenges spiritually that are being foisted upon us. Anthropological studies or anthropological societies ban discussion of biological sex to protect trans and LGBT. I didn't even know it was called QI now. And I am a late adopter with anything, with all this stuff. And I increasingly show my age. Two major anthropological associations have canceled a panel discussion on the importance of biological sex, setting harm to trans and LGBTQI communities and their collective dignity. They're collective dignity. And again, we're living in an age of inversion when we go, move from the dignity of those who want to defend Western civilization and this. On September 25th, the American Anthropological Association and the Canadian Anthropological Society wrote a letter canceling the upcoming conference panel. Let's talk about sex, baby, why biological sex remains a necessary analytic category in anthropology, which you have previously accepted. This is censorship by the same power elite. And obviously, I don't think if you're with me, I don't think I have to explain this. This is part of a depopulation agenda. But where this kind of interests me for the moment is I couldn't pull it up, but I believe Robert Kennedy Jr. has a book out called Vaxxed versus Unvaxxed, Let the Science Speak. And we're living in an age where it doesn't. Propaganda speaks. He could have that book, and if people already have an opinion, very few are going to be moved by empirical evidence, and that's going to increase. This is the age of delusion. That's what it's about. We can't speak facts to each other. And I think as we're going through these extremes between the tensions and pulls and crisis in society to these kind of more normalized periods, there is maybe a window from which we can kind of have conversations and look rationally at evidence. But when we hit the next crisis, the windows will close, and science becomes the bed partner of propaganda. So that's what I got for you today. The point of this is to start connecting some of these headlines, but I want to very much do this in the sense that how can we look at these headlines and not get sucked into the spectacle of this? How can we see this, see the tension, the challenge in front of us, and knowingly transcend all of the chaos? And I think as Caucasians, if I'm speaking to Caucasians out there, I think there's a way to defend the mystical body of Christ and our race and our heritage in a dignified manner that demonstrates to the world that Western culture is something unique. It was the grace of Christ that brought it about, and that we need to continue to defend it, but we have to be careful about these demonic pitfalls as we're defending Western civilization. So this has been Censored News with Dr. Deep State. And in a way, I think we almost have to have an attitude of getting excited about these things. Like I said, some of this tears my heart apart about what's going on in Sweden, and I'm ethnically Scandinavian. What's going on in England. I spent a year there studying at Oxford, and I really learned to love the culture. But when we talk about somebody like Winston Churchill, who talked about an enigma wrapped in a riddle, wrapped in a mystery, he himself is probably an agent inside of a double agent. But when the bombing came and he said, "England, this is your finest hour," that echoed in my head a lot of times in my own personal life through some of my greatest challenges, that saying. And something often has stirred in my mind and taken me to this place where I can rise above. And I hope we can all do that together as we go through these headlines. So I'm going to conclude today. Again, this has been Censored News with Dr. Deep State, and I truly hope all of you are doing well.